안녕하십니까. 유네스코 한국위원회 문화커뮤니케이션위원장 박경립입니다. 유네스코 한국위원회 회관에 오신 것을 열렬히 환영합니다. 사유의 밤 2022년 개최를 축하드리며 행사의 큰 성공과 좋은 결실을 축원합니다. 도시는 사회의 각 분야와 사람들이 유기적인 관계를 갖고 살아가는 곳이기 때문에 도시의 건강함은 곧 도시에 살고 있는 사람의 건강을 의미합니다. 우리는 우리가 살고 있는 도시 환경이 깨끗하고 안전하며
We must constantly
도시
check whether the environment
문화가
of the city
도시 사람들의
in
삶의
which we
질을
live is clean and
높이는지
safe, whether
끊임없이
the social and
살펴야 합니다.
cultural balance of the city is equal,
유엔
and
지속
whether the
가능한
quality of life
목표는
of the city's people is improved.
지속 가능
The
발전
11th
목표는
goal of the US
포용적이며
UNSDG
안전하며
is to create
회복력과 지속
cities and
가능성이
human
있는 도시와
settlements that are
인간
inclusive,
정주
safe,
환경을 만드는 것을
resilient, and
11번째
sustainable.
목표로 하고 있습니다. 이를
In order
달성하기
to
위해
achieve
시민의
this,
참여를
it is
보장해야 하며
also emphasizing the
통합적이고
need to ensure
지속 가능한
citizen
도시계획을
participation
수립할 수 있는
and building
역량을
capacities
키워야
to formulate
한다고 강조하고
integrated
있습니다.
and sustainable urban
지금 우리의
planning.
지구촌은 다양한 도전에 직면하고
Nowadays, our
있습니다.
global village is
디지털
facing
혁명을
various
비롯한
challenges.
4차 산업
Due to the
사회로의
rapidly
진입 등
changing social
급변하는
environment such
사회
as the
환경으로
digital
인해
revolution
기존
and the rush into the
가족과
fourth industrial
공동체는
revolution era
급변하며 해체되는
and
과정에
rapidly
있어
changing
새로운
society,
대안이 절실한
existing
시기입니다.
families and communities
언제까지
are being
진행될지 모르는
dismantled.
팬데믹은
It is
우리의
a
삶의
time when
일상을
new
흔들고
alternatives
있습니다.
are urgently
이런
needed.
관점에서
The
이번
pandemic is
Night of
shakingly
Ideas
up daily lives, and we do not know how long it will last. From this perspective, it seems very timely to set the theme of this Night of Ideas 2020 as
새로운 시대에
rebuilding
맞는
together
적절한 삶의 그릇을
communities at
마련하고
work.
앞으로의
We're getting
삶을
ready
받아줄
for the
새로운
approaching
공동체의
era
가능성
and seriously reflecting on the possibilities of a new community. Because we know that the current phenomenon is not a temporary change, but rather a big wave of change. Humanity has a long history of bravely responding to and overcoming these challenges. Thinking, communicating, understanding other people's lives, and being together has been an important driving force for the continuous development of mankind. As we live now in different cultures and environment, transcending borders and communicating with each other is in itself a new possibility and a meaningful time to learn from each other's wisdom. I hope this Night of Ideas deepens the discussion about the city we want and the creation of a new community. I would like to thank the French Embassy in Korea, Ambassador Philippe Lefort, and all the other people who made efforts, as well as the presenters, panelists, and moderators. Thank you very much.
안녕하십니까? 필리프 파리입니다. 프랑스 대표입니다. 반갑습니다. 오신 여러분.
Nice to meet you, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador of the Kingdom of Belgium to the Republic of Korea, dear François, Mr. Kyung-Lee Park, Chairperson of the Culture and Communication Subcommittee of the Korean National Commission for UNESCO, distinguished guests, dear followers and friends of the Night of Ideas, dear viewers from online, I'm very happy to open this evening, the 7th Night of Ideas, which the theme is Rebuilding Together. The Night of Ideas coincides with the start of the French presidency of the Council of the European Union. Also, I would like to warmly thank the speakers, to our European friends, Laurent Pereira from Belgium, Samuel Chemeret from Hungary, as well as our partners from the Belgian Embassy and the Hungarian Cultural Center who joined this initiative alongside French and Korean experts, Christophe Hutin, Cécile Maisonneuve, Haewon Shin, and Jae Song-jung. I would also like to thank the Korean National Commission for UNESCO for their warm welcome, as well as artist Diana Ben and Yoon Chung-gun. Tonight, we're going to reflect on the rebuilding of societies facing singular and specific challenges in this period in which we live. We will discuss and explore the resilience, cooperation between individuals, mobilization of civil societies. What a beautiful program we have. We're part of the continuity in the project presented at the French Pavilion in the Venice Architecture Biennale, presented by the architect Christophe Hutin, who does us honor to speak tonight. Believe me, dear Christophe Hutin, we really regret that the sanitary conditions do not allow us today to welcome you in Seoul. Let's start the discussions without further delay. I leave the floor to Mrs. Soyeon Park, professor in the Department of Architecture at Seoul National University, who will be your guide during this evening. I wish you all a wonderful night of ideas.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, as introduced just earlier, my name is Park Soo-hyun, professor of the Department of Architecture at Seoul National University. I'll be leading you through tonight, the Night of Ideas. And I am very much enchanted and attracted by the idea of sharing and exchanging ideas and thoughts between experts. And this has been held on a regular basis every year by the French Cultural Institute, and the title of this year is Rebuilding Together. It means build together. And in Korea, we have a subtitle, Community at Work. This gains more meaning to us. And I am very much looking forward to this conference, to this dialogue, which is composed of two discussions, session 1 and session 2. And during the intermission, we're going to have a performance. And before that, we would like to listen to a keynote speech delivered by Mr. Christophe Hutin. And as introduced by our ambassador, he has served as commissioner and artistic director of the 2021 Architecture Biennale of Venice. And he also runs his own design studio. And also, his exhibition is now being held at the Seoul Center of Urban Cities and also urbanism with community at work. All right, then we'd like to open this conference with the keynote speech of Mr. Hutin.
Good morning, all of you. And first of all, I want to thank you to invite me. I want to thank all of Urbanism to hosting the film that we did produce for the Biennale. And I want to thank also all the staff of the Institut Français and the French embassy who are very dynamic and supporting the work and the ideas, because this is the theme of tonight for you. Unfortunately, I'm not in your city today. It's a big shame for me because the COVID doesn't allow us to travel as we want. And you must know that I've got the COVID from this morning and my children too. So I think I'm better at home than in the space with you. So the project I introducing to you is the Communities at Work. It was done for the Biennale in Venice, and the theme of the Biennale was how do we live together? So I did this project to answer to this question, and a lot of countries bring a lot of ideas on the table, as my colleague Awon Shin, who did a very good input with Future School in the Korean pavilion. And so it was the opportunity for a lot of meetings and sharing ideas and process in architecture. So I will go straight to the point of what I'm doing in this exhibition. We are working in existing situation. We think that in architecture, usually the person who is making the design and the people who are living inside are not connected. And so we want to set up new process where these people can meet and can work together to make better architecture. So we are dealing with existing situation. That means that very carefully, with a lot of attention to the people where they are living. We want to transform the places and make it better. Instead of making a new form or starting from a web page, we want to deal with the reality of the world as it is. And for that, we are using new tools like inquiries on the reality. So that means that we are crossing a lot of discipline, a lot of work to reach that point. In Venice, we did movies about a different case study in the world. And it's very important also to show what we are doing, and because we are acting. So the communities at work, it is talking about the way the people are transforming their environment, their built environment. And because in the daily life, the people are acting. Living is in action. And so the people every day, they transform architecture, they try to make it better, more comfortable, more suitable about the project life they've got. And so the architecture must move and must follow this desire of the people to have a better place and to be able to act on the place where they are living. So we did some case study, and for example, in Bordeaux, we did transform a social housing block, 530 units. We did transform with the people inside the building. We had a new concrete floor, prefab concrete floor to extend the capacity of the building. And so the people can have a double size for the apartment, and they can have new spaces, and they can transform the daily life. And what is important also is that spaces, they are not in a functionalist approach, because we don't give a function. It's just a new space where people can invite the life they want to have. So I propose you to make a short visit of the French pavilion in Venice, because we did some performance with a friend of mine, a choreographer, a dancer, who is making performance in the exhibition. So it's a way for me to introduce you the exhibition and for you to have an experience of what we have done. So you will see some picture of the case study, and you will understand, I hope, better what I'm trying to say. So we can start the video just to show and to explain the content and the process. So welcome in Venice in the French pavilion. So we start first with a project in Mérignac, where it's a place with 93 houses. It was a city of emergency after the decolonization in the 60s in France. And the people are still there. It was temporary, but they are still there for 50 years. And we did transform, we are actually transforming that place with the people. You can see now it's the way we are working. And also, I'm showing a project that I did in Detroit in America, where it was a vacant plot in the neighborhood, and we did a project on that plot to transform it with the people around and with the community who are living here. So you see a landscape architect, and we did a botanical garden ready-made. It was a wonderful experience. And our work is dealing also with the improvisation. We are trying to do what the movement of the 20th century did in music with the jazz music and improvisation. We are trying to improvise in architecture. This is a space, a new extra space for the Grand Park in Bordeaux. So you can see it's 15 level, and we did put this winter garden for the people to enjoy the climate, the view, and to feel better at home. We did also a case study in research work in Hanoi, because I discovered that in the suburbs of Hanoi in Vietnam, the people are transforming themselves. They extend their apartment exactly in the same way we are doing, but they do it by themselves. So it was a very good learning for me. And I always travel to learn from the places that I meet people, and I always, it's marvelous the capacity of the community they've got to invent and to make a better environment to live. And the last cases are in Soweto, it's a very important place for me because it's where I have learned architecture when I was younger. Because the people, they are able to make very simple, very light architecture, improvising with a lot of freedom and poetry. And with my student with the architectural school, we did some construction work. For example, on that picture, we did transform an orphanage. It was a 2 weeks construction with 200 people coming from around, from the neighborhood, and we did a fantastic work with them. And this image is showing what I want to say to conclude is we are trying to deal with the meeting of the skill of the architecture and the performance of the people. This is what I'm looking for to make a nice meeting between these two input. Thanks a lot, and I give the space to Laurent, and we can discuss after later. I'm very sorry for not being here, but I hope I will discover Korea one day and learn from you a lot of things. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everybody. So wait a second, I'm changing my stuff. Okay. Yes. So thank you, Christophe. I discovered your work and I thought it was very interesting. And I was thinking about this, that what you do, you work in a very specific context, which is, I was thinking about how can I relate this context that you work in with the different context, right? The different things you show with the Korean situation, right? Which is a completely different, like my problem was like, I don't see how how we could apply the knowledge you have into our situation, because the way it works here, you guys hear me, right? It's okay. The way it works here is that the market forces are so strong that all the thinking that you're providing, I don't know how it would fit, right? Everything is like space is commodified. Everybody agrees that we should make more money with space, and so there's such a pressure that is completely unrelated to this desire of community or like or even like a private space. That I was wondering, like, how can I apply your knowledge into like the society I'm living in, which is very separate, I think, from your experience, right? And one thing I was thinking is that my only experience that actually was kind of a positive in that sense is that you know, we make new housing, we make a lot of new housing, like towers, and everybody likes them. People who live in the small houses, they get an apartment in the tower. Nobody opposes them. Everybody's happy to have their own streets and own space destroyed. It's an amazing thing. But then one thing happens is that, for instance, places are created like silver towns. That was something that was like a trend. And silver towns is just like some storage area for old people, right? So you can see that there is this kind of technocratic decision to create a space where we pretend to care about old people, which is a problem in Korea, right? There's a lot of, the older population is growing. And in my experience, one thing that goes completely contrary to that was we did a citizen garden, right? This is the only experience in Korea that I have. Like Seoul City organized a citizen garden in some island in the river. And it was the only time where I could see old people. Like I was trying to grow vegetables and I was really bad at it. I could not do it. And you had like young couples and children and old people, a lot of old people. And suddenly old people could teach us something. They can never teach us anything in our, you know, like capitalist society. Like they are useless. And suddenly they were useful. So I really learned something from that experience, that but I don't know, like, I don't know how to connect those things. It's more like a question that I want to ask you, like, because this citizen garden was a technocratic decision. It was a city that just said, now this place is a citizen garden. It was not improvised or anything. It was very technocratic. City government also decided. But then actually that gave a space that was non-commodified. There was like a temporary space of freedom. But I don't know exactly how it connects to your work, but I would like to talk about that, right? Like, and how you know, like, how the space in France or like the institution you work with connect to this. That's it. I think I'm quite long. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ferreira. Ferreira has just posed a question to Christophe, and thank you very much for posing that question. And while we are waiting for Christophe to make an answer to that, as moderator, I would like to brief how we will go through the whole discussion session here. Well, actually, the keynote speech by Mr. Christophe Witting has posed as many things to think about, and also Mr. Pereira has explained what kind of collective gardens are being made. Well, before we get into the details of our discussion, we'd like to have three panelists for the discussion, and we have just listened to the keynote speech by Mr. Witting, and I am shouldered with Professor Shin Hae-won, who has served as artistic director of Korean Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and we also have Mr. Pereira, who runs design studio, architecture studio, of Che Pereira Architects. So we would like to talk under the theme of community at work all together. And Mr. Witting, you have just received a question from Mr. Pereira, and while waiting for your answer, would like to ask Professor Shin Hae-won with the theme of how we build together. Well, actually, she has prepared a very good exhibition under that theme during the Biennale, so we would like to ask her about the issues that arise during the collective architecture, and also we would like to have another round of comments by each panelist. Thank you very much. Well, actually, this is a great pleasure for me to be part of this meaningful discussion.
Sorry that we cannot be here together in the same space. Can you hear me? You cannot
Well,
hear.
she's asking in Korean. She's very sorry that she cannot be with you in the same space, and she sends you a hello to both of you.
I have had the privilege of being together in Venice with Christophe Witting, and as a architect, but as also a fellow curator. And just for the convenience of the discussion, I will just speak in English, and it will be translated in Korean. I had an opportunity to create this the Korean Pavilion into a future school where we had more than 200 participants creating this exhibition together. It was a performative exhibition. I think the key point was that we wanted to actually create a new future in a way, acting in now, in present, under the common theme of climate crisis, diaspora, and innovation. Of course, this is a big subject, but then we had more than over 50 programs of different specialists, architects, theorists, also a performer, a cook, someone who makes a satellite, scientist, and all these people came together. And I think the key that made it really special also for our pavilion, but not just our own, but under the theme of the future school, is that all these people made a collaboration and coalition in order to deal with this complex theme and also the complex world that we're living in. How can we make a better world through our own expertise, but also sharing ideas. And the key concept that we had was through what we call generative dialogue. So this is not through by just throwing out knowledge, but actually to really hear what the others were thinking, and through dialogues of listening. And that was part of the theme of the future school, but also through this time, as Christophe, you know, that we went through also made this curators collective, where all the curators of more than 50 national pavilions, national different countries pavilion curators came together and had this open discussion throughout the whole time, more than a year and a half. So we made this collective where kind of going transboundary and transnational, where we are dealing with how will we live together. And in a way, one step is to start talking to each other and discussing. And that was what we did. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your comment, Professor Shin. Well, I have just found an overarching common theme, making together. So rebuilding together means, as Professor Shin has just commented, it means lay a groundwork for everybody. But that leads us to a more practical question, as Mr. Pereira has just questioned before. And this question is another one that goes to Mr. Witang. You have commented on Soweto, Detroit, and Bordeaux, and in particular, in what you did in Soweto as project, you must have started from communication with inhabitants there, and you must have been engaged in a variety of participatory design and work. But who funds the project is the first question that we need to deal with. And what kind of structure do we have to deal with? What kind of architecture should be engaged? And how can we make a link with inhabitants, residents over there? And these are questions that we need to find answers to. Well, actually in Seoul, participatory architecture or construction is a bit different from the common trend of the globe, because Seoul has a specific types of condominiums or apartments for living conditions. And well, the elderly is also engaged in a series of acts by gardening small gardens in an apartment complex. So how could you explain this as a collective construction or Soweto project that you had? So community design or community construction gives us these questions. Well, as moderator, let me put it this way. The designing of community, the first structure that enables the design of community, how can we secure a public funding? And once the public funding is secured, what types of attitude is necessary for architects to engage? And the third, how can you make it sustainable with the participation of the community and residents? Well, Mr. Witang, you have carried out a Soweto project with your architecture students. If it's still if it is still there, if it is still maintained, what do you think is the motivation of the growth engine of that Soweto project that maintains the project up until now? So this is the question. Now the floor is yours.
Okay, so there is a lot of questions. I will try to be short and precise. First of all, what I can say is that there is to answer the question of Mr. Pereira, there is an international market in architecture where I think, for example, in housing, we are producing almost the same housing in France, in Korea, in everywhere in the world. And for me, it's a problem because it doesn't respect the culture of the people. And what I want to say is that moving forward, then the standard allows also the people to express themselves and to find a local solution also for the situation. So what I'm saying is that instead of demolishing and making new building, I propose to transform the city, the buildings, the places, all the area as they are. Because sometimes the people prefer to move into new buildings because they don't understand, they don't know the quality and the capacity of the place where they are living. And the places are full of history and affective meanings also for the people, not for the architect, but for the people who are living inside. You've got your personal story in the building, in the places. So it's very important to be with delicacy, to take care of the places. And for me, architecture is a work in progress. You don't have to make a new world when you make a project. You just have to modify to make the situation better very carefully. And the people understand also very easily the benefit they will have in this kind of process. And I can say also that in terms of attitude, I'm more interested in making project than business. So maybe we have to think about that. And after, to continue to answer, is with Mrs. Shin is saying, and what she was doing in the very good Korean pavilion in Venice, is if you want to put the human in the center of the process of making city, you can avoid to engage yourself with human and personal relationship with the context and the people who are living in the context. Because sometimes we are making projects, we don't know the people, we don't know how they live, and also for the architect and the people who are working in the process, making inquiries, dealing with the reality and the complexity of the world, transform also yourself. And so it's very efficient in terms of project. And to answer also the question of the founding and the way I'm working, you can see in the exhibition that we were dealing with case study in very different scales. You can have a 530 units building that we did transform with Anna Caton, Jean-Philippe Vassal, and Frédéric Druot. It was a very long process. It was almost 5 years to do this work. And don't forget that the people were still living inside the building during the construction work, because we did extend from the outside. So we transformed the daily life without disturbing them. So you can have a new concrete floor construct, and in the same time you can watch TV at home. So this is very important to be a very to make it carefully. And so this building, of course, this process was done with a public investment in Bordeaux, and the owner of the building, there is only one owner. He was making the investment to transform his building, and he strongly believed that now we can continue for the next 50 years with the tenants and with the building, because the building is like a new building, but keeping the people and the story inside. Sometimes when we deal with the situation in architecture, we are looking from outside. So we consider the building as a very, in a simple way, as a urban form. We say it's a tower, it's a building, it's a plot. But in fact, in the case of Bordeaux, you realize that 530 families are living inside from 50 years. And inside it's 130 marvelous world, all different, because people they are coming from different culture and countries, and it's completely amazing to be inside. And what I'm saying is that we are making the project inside the situation, dealing with the people. So you consider in another way what you are looking at is not it's not only a form, it's people living inside, and you have to deal with that. It takes a lot of time, but for me it's the most grateful, and is where the pleasure is also to share this pleasure with the people, because we have to make money, but we have to provide pleasure in architecture. This is what I want to say. And about the funding, about a very small project like in Soweto, it's a very big project for the ambition, but for the size, it's small. It's an orphanage that we did renovate, and it took us 2 weeks. And I want to say to you that the most renewable energy and the most sustainable energy is the energy of the people. And we don't spend a lot of money buying materials or new technology. We were just dealing with the skill of the people, what they are able to do. And we did really the meeting between our skill of a designer and the performance of the people. I mean, what they are able to do. And the young people who are dancing in the picture I show you in Soweto, it's a school of dance, and they get money to finance the orphanage with dancing. So all the floor we did outside, it's a stage for them to perform and to make a sustainable and to make money for the institution they are running. So yeah, there is no model or a solution. Each scale, each project need to think, and we have to give more and building and spending less. This is what I want to say. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다. 그 선생님 말씀에 반복적으로 이제
Yes, thank you very much. There are some words that come out very often because we're talking about architecture and buildings, but we are very much interested in the people, delicately, careful. Those are some words that you have been repeating. And Professor Shin just mentioned that we have to start from communicating with the people. And also Professor Yuta also said that it takes a very long time, that we must be approaching it very carefully, very delicately. And that those values are important, those values that we share within communities. But those values are not very easily accepted in the society in which we live. And I believe that Mrs. Shin, you have been thinking about this for a very long time. It's not easy, it's the right way, but we feel and we need to make efforts towards this direction.
그 가치 value, if we're talking about the value and how this participatory community works can be viewed, one of the first, I think, step is that to acknowledge that we don't know, and we don't know everything, especially with architects. We plan everything, even from the minute details, and project it so that we have a clear vision, which is very important. But at the same time, really looking from a point, from the eye level of the people who are really using and being the user, and also us being one of them. But I think it's also important, like Laurent and Che Pereira, they create this amazing, beautiful building. I think this is the also another important thing, that we architects create buildings, architecture. But there is also, I think, from that point, we are also exploring that it's not just that as a finished product, but it's actually also, in order to do that, we need a very careful design of the process. And I think the process, even though the outcome might not be the perfect vision of what we have envisioned, but maybe that process makes it possible for that kind of ultimate architecture to come. And we keep striving to come to that, but also in Korea, we are given such a short time, and time is the essence of everything. But at the same time, even given that short time and the low budget, there is all these architects who strive to include and be facilitating much as possible what we are given as a restriction. But restriction sometimes becomes a potential to create something different and experimental, new and innovative, I think. And one of the questions that I have also to Laurent and Christophe is, how do you see this role of an architect kind of changing, and how can we expand this role? And this is also, I know that Park Soyeon, professor, she also does all these other community works and so on, and she's expanding. So this role of an architect is also always a question for me.
Thank you. Professor Pereira, can you answer Mrs. Shin's question. And I also know that you're preparing currently a work that will be finalized in 2025. And also you might be aware of the fact that in Korea, we must do everything very quickly and very efficiently. And that is why in terms of participation, it is very important because we need to do it very quickly and rapidly, but at the same time, encourage citizens to participate. So this might be some contrasting values. So as Professor Shin said, architects have some values that they consider very important and they strive to achieve them. However, Christophe Hutin suggested that we need to find some different approaches. How can we resolve this value contrast that we have with the current situation and limits we're facing? Please, Mr. Pereira. I believe it's the same context as your question.
Yes. Yeah. So the thing is, like, the way I see, but for instance, that was the thing I was noting with the work of Christophe, is that maybe his context is also a little bit like a slower growth, in terms of like the social housing that you're talking about is not expanding radically. There's like a bit more space, or like, what I mean by that is in our problem is that the growth is gigantic. And so, and we are in this kind of it's the capitalist market, right? And then there's nothing to stop it. So then what I think is, like, sometimes we get like 1% of the space to make some community effort. That is kind of like a maker. Like, that's, I think, the Korean situation. And I think it's gonna be the Asian situation. Like, high growth markets, they are like unstoppable. And so when you talk about, and I don't know the project in Detroit, but I'm wondering, like, is it like a situation of resistance, like some kind of micro situation where the growth has stopped? But actually, in my condition, I don't see any of that. Nobody wants it. Also, like, people, they want their own house to be destroyed, and they lose something. They lose their own culture. They lose everything, but they want this apartment of the future, right? So to me, the problem when I hear you is I really like it. And we talk about this with my students, for instance. And I tell them, you know, go to speak with people. You have to socially understand them. You have to talk with them. Don't study them like from a technocratic point of view. But actually, all we do is there's like a huge force that is just flying over us. That's the way. It's a little bit a pessimistic take, right? Because I really so the way I think is that we have, in that context where we create new context, new cities all the time, we have to actually have a strategy of the new. It's impossible to resist. We have to accept that we have to kind of nudge the new to something that is like socially not some kind of social desert where everybody is alienated, right? Like, that's, but we cannot stop the new. We cannot just say, oh, we're gonna do some context and social thing, because there's a rice field and then there's like 5,000 people living on it suddenly, right? So it's really hard to kind of make a connection between the way I see and I'm not building this 5,000, by the way, right? Somebody else does it, some company. But what I mean is that it's really hard to connect the two. Like, it's really hard to teach my student to care about the context, because the context is gone immediately, right? So I'm a little bit pushing back against this contextual realist approach, because to me, realism is useless, because reality is just gone in 5 minutes. So I'm a little bit, I want to push a little bit, because there's a little, your method, I feel your method is limited to us, this is very, like, I really like it, but I don't know how to apply it elsewhere. in Asia, like in all the like high growth development country, or maybe Africa now, it's gonna be hard to apply. So I want to a little bit push this thing. A bit skeptical or like pessimistic approach. Sorry.
그 skepticism, that's fair. That's fair. 선생님들께서 답변 준비해 주실 거로 생각하는데.
Well, I understand that you are making your answer to this. Well, actually, participatory planning and design, the positioning of it is not a solution that could replace what we do, but there are some things that we miss. So that is why we talk about participatory design and collectives as an alternative, let's say. Well, this may be the same situation not only in Asia but also in the Western world, and I don't think that everything could be replaced or substituted by one single term such as participatory design or architecture. But it's true that Korea has been rapidly growing, and participation or participatory has become a part of our life. We cannot deny it. The term is rooted in every areas such as regulations and construction architectural regulations, and that's quite apparent. So more than you think, Mr. Pereira, participatory design and architecture is being present in everywhere in Korea, but building, housing, and the mainstream of it should find a common place or should strike a balance with a participatory design, I guess. What do you think, Ms. Shin?
Of course, Laurent, you're portraying one side of the reality, but at the same time, it is, I think, worldwide that the architects build architecture buildings is minor. It's actually these developers and construction companies that drives the market. And still, I think in Korea, there is a lot of forces and also much more engaged civil and social infrastructure that is being implemented from a nation-wide policy. So I think there is a note that if you compare to, I think, any other countries, I think there is a lot of investment in the social aspect of the facilities, buildings, and governmental also involvement in building up these infrastructure. And that's something that is somehow working. And not just in architecture, but in much more of a service oriented, how this the citizens then can be facilitated to be benefiting from the social infrastructure, what I call. So there is that kind of notion of there is a market-driven part, but there is also this socially policy making, and then also engagement towards the much more larger community facilitation and service. So I don't think that side can be ignored, and especially with students, because that's when we can change. And I think this is the time where we have to keep talking about the value of the communities and value of the participation. And we are, as one of the participants, that we can change. And this is, one of the ways that I see, even from here and from global perspective. I don't know if Christophe, you...
예, 위탕 선생님 add 하실 거, do you have anything to add to this?
Yes,
Mr.
to continue the discussion, thank you. Just to say that Mr. Pereira, you don't have to be pessimistic because for different reasons. I will say that first, when you are dealing with participatory, in the project I'm showing, the participatory of the people start maybe 50 years ago on the situation you are dealing with. So it doesn't start when the architect arrived. The participatory process starts 50 years ago, and it runs every day. And you just have to understand and to deal with this context if you want to keep it and to move it for the future. So this is the way the thing I believe. After that, I'm very honest with you, and I don't have the ambition to change the market and the system, because I'm not crazy. I'm realistic, and I understand also the way the market is working. Maybe in architecture also we cannot opposite always these two situations, the market and the participatory or the community. Sometimes my proposal also is to say that if we build a very simple structure, very open, maybe you give a chance for the community to be in the building and to express themselves and to get the enough space and possibilities to show and to act to transform the architecture. Because I was saying it's a work in progress. For me, I will be honest also, I'm a little bit lazy. And I think in architecture, we have to be lazy, because making a new form, a new building every time, for me, it's very boring. I prefer to deal with the complexity of the situation, because it's a resource, unbelievable resource for creation. It's very creative to work with the situation and the way the people are living. And also, in terms of sustainability, I think it's a very important point. How can we continue the urban sprawl? How can you continue to build towers and buildings instead of transforming the existing building? In terms of carbon issue and ecology, I think the system doesn't work. So it works for the moment, but one day we have to change the mindset. I don't know when, I'm not in the position to take this kind of decision. I'm just experimenting some input and some possibility for our skill and our discipline to move forward. But in terms of urban sprawl, and it's a disaster to create new city all the time, because the city is already here, and the life is already here everywhere. And maybe we have to make a lot of work, engaging discussion, like Mr. Shin was doing in his project, Future School, to show that maybe what we've got, they've got value. And because the market is explaining to us that our culture, our way of life doesn't have value. We have to buy a future project. And I don't believe in that. I'm not stupid, I'm sorry. And I strongly believe that what we are dealing in our life is having a value, and this is the message I want to send to the market, that it's valuable the way we are living, so we are taking care of that.
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Witang. And we have to be lazy. I really like that statement. Well, actually, up until now, how we constructed a city doesn't guarantee our future anymore because of climate change and demographic and societal change, as mentioned by Professor Shin. And those signals, the way we've been doing, cannot be maintained in the long term. That's why we need to find out a new solution or a new replacement or substitute. And as one of the solutions, participatory design has been on the table as one chance or possibility. We know that there has been a value in it, participatory design, but there are limits that we need to overcome: efficiency, expertise, and how to adjust the conflict, deal with conflict between different stakeholders, and a new mechanism that could be applied to this process. So as Mr. Witang has commented, we need to experiment in that sense on new values or new environments, a new way of living together. And Ms. Shin has been trying many different and new trials and endeavors in that sense, but make them practical, make them part of our daily lives should be our responsibility and task. So what should we do, and what could we do in that sense? I would like to run another round to this.
one of the questions that I have also about participatory design or architecture is how can we really design ways of participation? And this is a question because there is a concept also in 참여 건축이나 참여 participatory process design. There is a kind of a fixed idea that okay, once you have this thing, there surveys or ideas get heard, but then there are times where neglected minority, women, maybe children, immigrants, socially, what we say, not so outspoken people, how can we be also open to those to participate? Because also what happens in Korea, I think when it becomes participatory, there's like loud voice, 목소리 큰 사람, or like people who feel they have the right to voice. And this is a thing that I also had struggled, is that I didn't feel like I had the right to voice anything. Even though in architecture we are trained to present ideas, but at the same time it's not a comfortable concept of voicing out. And this is something that I also have questioned: how best can we facilitate this in design this way of participation?
also 답변과 동시에 이제 질문을 주신 셈인데 사실 오늘 이제 토론이 조금 더 이제 생동감이 있는 이유는 이제 페레이라 선생님께서 이제 리얼리티 체크 같은
I believe that the discussion today is very lively because Mr. Pereira is pushing us to give more answers and to think even more. And he even mentioned that he was pessimistic, but I believe that this is a very realistic approach because we are looking forward at many possibilities, but Mr. Pereira is mentioning that we are having many difficulties attaining those possibilities, that it might maybe not be possible to attain them. And therefore, we need to discuss about what kind of effort we're making. And this is a question that I would like to give to Christophe Hutin. What kind of efforts you're making to overcome those difficulties? Because we have many challenges, and what kind of efforts can we do that are feasible in order, Mr. Pereira, what do you think are the possibilities that are feasible for us to do in order to overcome these?
Did you understand the question correctly?
Did you understand the question?
Did you get the question?
So the thing is like the way we were not arguing, but a little bit pushing is, I think one thing we can agree, like I think, is that like the way I can see a common direction is that actually one thing that we have to change in order I know Christophe cannot change the entire market, right? But one thing that I was thinking is that through education, right? I thought because in Korea at least, you have a lot of students. They become bureaucrats, right? They don't go design. Most of them don't become designers. They become like managers, and either in the private sector or in the government. There's a lot of architects in the government, and so I see, for instance, I meet my former students in working for like a city hall or something like this, and I think each generation is a much more aware. Like I can see that, like that's, I don't exactly have the same experience working in Korea, but I don't know participatory so much, but I can see that the newer bureaucrats are much better than the previous ones, right? They are socially aware. They understand when we talk about something, they understand, right? And it's something that is actually new here. So my experience was better than before, which was like when you deal with the administration, it was just like power-based. and now we had this kind of rational discourse. So when I teach my students, then 5 or 10 years later, they come back at me and they are, they are in the administration and so on. And also changing the ideology, general, like pushing back against the market ideology. Well, we're not winning, but we're not, it's not completely desperate, right? Sometimes there's some ideas that goes from, say, education through society like this. So that's the only thing that, like, I can say I have an effect on, more not as an architect, but more like in education, actually, like changing the ideology in the administration, in society, with like social awareness, I would call it, right? What do you guys think? I don't know any other way.
Well, actually, our discussion is headed to education, it seems. Well, all of us are practitioners and also educators. We teach. So in teaching students, community participation should be well reflected to the content of what we teach, and what kind of innovation can be possible should also be asked by ourselves first. And as promised in the beginning of this session, it is now time to accommodate questions received through YouTube channel, and there is a very good one that I would like to share with all of you before we conclude our discussion. Well, the question is asked by Ms. Kwon Da-sum. In the process of community planning to solve issues of a local community and reflecting the ideas and opinions of residents is one thing that matters, I know. But is the community a single form of collectivism? Because within the community, we have different contexts of policy, economy, society. There are different prisms of a society. Then, community. Does community represent only one aspect of them? So it means that there are lots of stakeholders involved in a single community. Well, do architects try to reflect all different voices of a community? This is my question. What is your case? What is your stance? So please prepare yourself with an answer to this question.
And it has many layers of different groups, and when they conflicting one another, how we are going to resolve, or how can you represent a certain group's ideas and values? So 그게 질문인 것 같습니다. 어떻게 생각하십니까? 이땅 선생님께 먼저 답변을.
Mr. Wheaton, would you like to go first?
Yes, I can. First of all, I want to say that in the relationship you deal with a community, when you do a project, I always consider that one person or one family count for one. I mean that I never consider that we've got one solution for different people and for a community in this global account. I always consider that one count for one, because it's a question of democracy and of politics. And I can say also with this kind of process, when you engage relationship with the people, it's always better to have lots of students or architects. It's better than to have one planner, because one planner is you've got in the process usually one person decide for thousands of inhabitants. They take very strong decision, and in terms of democracy, for me it's a problem. So I prefer 1,000 of architects than one planner. And because you deal with smallest group, you can have a better relationship with them. And so politically, it's really more efficient on my point of view. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think it was the case. And always considering that one count for one is very important.
감사합니다. 신 선생님께서 이 질문에 대한 답변.
Thank you very much, Professor Shin. What's your take?
질문.
First of all, thank you very much for such a pinpointing question. I like it. Well, posing a question makes us aware. 저희
And do we question this when we are dealing with the community, what we call the community? And I had an opportunity. I've been designing schools and classrooms, and there was a school that is dominantly what we called 다문화 과정 학생들, so students from different immigrant families. And one of the process that we have taken is really to do a discussion and design charrettes and workshops together with these students, and they're one by one students. And one of the students who did not even speak a word of Korean was sitting in the classroom. And then so we had to do these drawings together. And what struck me was that he was never in his life been asked, what would you like in your class? What kind of atmosphere would you like? 한 번도 질문을 받은 적이 없는 거예요. So just even asking the question and to be aware that these voices are important, I think that's a start. And through that kind of involvement, that we are participatory, not by me serving the other, but it's that we are also the participant, so that we don't give the attitude that I know better than you. So I will tell you, or even that attitude kind of shows, especially in architects, we think that we know best. So it's very difficult to really be in that same position as one of them. 그래서 그거 자체를 먼저 이렇게 계속 하다 보면은
So if you continue to do so, then awareness becomes apparent, and that awareness leads you to change.
Sorry, I'm mixing Korean and English, but yeah, that's my opinion.
페라이라 선생님, do you want to add?
Mr. Pereira, would you like to add some comments onto this question, onto comments of other panelists?
신 선생님's comments.
Yeah, okay. There's a confusion. I could not hear the end very well. No, I mean, I actually I didn't do, like housing with like a diverse group, so I don't know. But the only thing I remember is that I work in Nowongu, which is not very rich place in Seoul, actually. And you have a lot of old people. It's a place that was kind of like deserted, and a lot of old people remain, like a working class or lower middle class. And one thing that we did, and it's the city, actually, this Nowongu, like the local government, decided to make a space for old people, just like a pavilion in the park, which is like some kind of 19th century, so the stuff you can find in France, the 19th century guinguette, right? And it has an amazing, like, it's amazing that it's somebody thought about this. Say like let's make a guinguette, right? Like let's make some little pavilion for them to sing and dance and stuff like that. And the success was amazing. Like really like overcrowd of old people converging in that place. So my experience is not like multiple groups, but it's actually sometimes there's like a deficit. Somebody has to see there's a strong deficit of free space. Not that the space is not there, but that it hasn't been organized for them. So again, I think, and in Korea, the old people, that is really much a separated category also because of Korean culture separates old people very much. I think it's an amazing, like it's a very interesting population to work with. And that there's a strongness, like there's a strong need for uncommodified space for them, right? So that's my kind of positive experience about that, right? Like some groups need help or need the city to open a space for them, right? The one I know is the old people, old Koreans, right? Working class people.
네. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comment. Well, I understand. I know that you must have your own and personal on-the-ground experiences and the community processes, even if you didn't thought it so back then. But looking back on, you now know what kind of participatory process could be applied to your own work. This may be the thoughts that you must have these days. Well, listening to Mr. Pereira and Mr. Witang and Professor Shin, well, actually, unlike what we have been doing, it is now time for us to be more careful and delicate and sensitive in terms of applying a new approach to our work, a conventional work, I would say. Well, in the end, community at work and rebuilding together, this means that the changes that we have had during the past decades. Well, in the process of making change, we need to leverage our expertise as architects, and there are some sensitivities and delicateness that we need to learn from the scratch as architects preparing for the future. And these are the keywords that we should keep in mind. And I think I can assign just 1 minute for your last ending comment, Mr. Witang, Mr. Pereira, and Professor Shin. I would like to ask for your ending comment for 1 minute, because this your exhibition, Mr. Witang, will make a lot of impressions to Korean audiences. And we're now discussing under the theme of rebuilding together. So how would you like to conclude our talk, Mr. Witang? Please go ahead.
I would like to say that rebuilding means that we have built already. So that means that maybe the goal that we have to add in architecture is not building more, but transforming and changing the way we are living. And for that, the first resource that is available for us is the communities and the way they are dealing with the daily life and changing, transforming, acting to make the architecture better. Because sometimes we don't ask them what they desire or what they want, what they need. And I like the sentence of Laurent about to say that maybe we can provide free space for old people, but in fact, all the people deserve free space to be able to write his personal life and his personal story. And to conclude, I will say that it's very difficult to change the present, to work on the present. So I'm not going to make the future or the past. It's too complicated for me. So we have to act in the present. Thanks a lot for this discussion. It was very, very interesting. Thanks a lot.
예, 마지막으로 그럼 신 선생님.
Lastly, Professor Shin.
It was a pleasure to be discussing together, Laurent and Christophe. And although we are separated, we cannot be in person together. I think one of the ways that we can start changing is by having such dialogue and discussions and collective thinking to how to better act also as a person, but as a citizen, but also as an architect responsible in this present moment. So we find our ways of acting, and we sometimes change our agency, but I think there is a variety of diverse ways of engaging with the communities and building, rebuilding. And it was such a pleasure to be discussing today. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다. 이 자체도 역시
Thank you very much. So yes, everything is changing. As Professor Uta said, we need to live in the present, and we need to do our best in the present. And I believe that we can wrap up this first session. I believe that this discussion will continue. We also talked about generations, but I think that the new generations will probably think differently than we do. And they will also find new approaches and new ways and new possibilities that are different from ours. And I believe that we can also participate in that. Maybe if we have the occasion to discuss about the same subject next year, I will be expecting to hear from you. And I would like to now end the first roundtable session. Next, we will have a sound performance. First of all, I would like to thank you to all three participants. Now, next, Diana Band and artist Yoon Chung-kun will do a sound performance which is called Walking Towards the Flow for about 15 minutes. This performance is a sound parade that creates a procession of sounds online. And for the last 10 days before today's performance, through a sound recruitment webpage, people send many sounds such as shouts, promises, body sounds, sounds from surrounding objects, and people's voices. So those sounds were organized into a performance. And I believe it's very timely for us because our theme today is rebuilding together. So I heard that the sound flows from right to left, so it is better to listen with headphones or a 2-channel speaker. Let's start the parade that is called Walking Towards the Flow. And after this performance, we'll be getting ready for the second session. Thank you very much.
사과 컴퓨터 공장 게임 과자. 사과 컴퓨터 공장 게임 과자. 사과 공장 컴퓨터 게임 과자. 사과 컴퓨터 공장 게임 과자. 사과 컴퓨터 공장 게임 과자. 사과 컴퓨터 공장
나, 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 나.
Répétим, répétim. Répétim, 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 répétim.
회전,
Répétim, répétim.
회전, 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 회전.
만들다, 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 만들다,
잘라버리고 딸들아 일어나라 깨어라 이 땅에 누군 자로 태어나 당신은 빨리 태어나 차별금지법 제정하라. 차별금지법 제정하라. 차별금지법 제정하라. 차별금지법 제정하라. 고양이, 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 고양이.
Und Katzen und aussehen das Meer und Freundinnen und Freunde und eine große, weite Blumenwiese. Ich liebe die Liebe, die Liebe, Liebe, Liebe. Ich liebe die Liebe, die Liebe, Liebe, Liebe. Ich liebe die Liebe und Katzen und
회전, 회전,
Well, it was Diana Band and artist Yoon Chung-gun, entitled Walking Towards the Flow. We really enjoyed the performance, which was a new experience to us, and it was an eye-opening performance to an unknown world. I would like to thank the artists once again. Well, now then it is time to regain our discussion with the second round of panel discussion. The title of the second debate is Smart Cities, New Opportunities for Innovative Citizen Participation and Community Enhancement. We have all panelists connected. First, Professor Tong Jae-sung, good evening. I know that you're connected from the US. Thank you very much. And he is a master planner of Smart City in Sejong City, Korea, and he also serves as professor at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, KAIST. He's such a renowned figure, he doesn't need any more explanation. And the second panelist is Mr. Shamu Semarey. Sorry for my pronunciation. Good evening. Well, he's an architect, urbanist, and director of content at Hungarian Contemporary Architecture Center, KEK. Nice to meet you. And last but not least, we have Ms. Cécile Maisonneuve, good evening. Well, Ms. Maisonneuve is now serving as a principal researcher at the Institut Montaigne in the area of city, territory, and sustainable development. And I really enjoyed your video recently. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for being with us today for this important discussion. And let us now begin the second round of discussion of this conference. Well, actually, we have been talking about urban governance, innovation, and living together. And these are keywords that we have touched upon, and we have to touch upon through this panel discussion session. And my first question goes to Professor Chung Jae-seung. As Master Planner of Smart City, would you like to share your experience? Because Professor Chung, you have been engaged in citizen participation and community enhancement. How do you see these two words as professor and as Smart City Planner? What kind of hopes are you having now? And to establish a fair city on the basis of digital technology that could enable a platform for better communication. Do you have any ideas to share with us? Please open our discussion tonight. Professor Chung, please. Good evening. I am Chung Jae-seung. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this meaningful discussion. Well, I'm not sure if I can be part of architects and urbanists to be part of the Night of Ideas. It is such a great honor for me. Well, the topic of this session is smart city, but you all know that I'm a brain scientist. I analyze the brain to come up with a diagnosis for patients. And if I expand my career into a city, I try to analyze their behavior or living pattern in a city so that we can have a better operation of a city. So analyzing brain is quite similar to analyzing a city. That is why I hold this position of smart city planner. And digital technology has been rapidly advancing, and that influences a lot the city. Well, during the past 2 decades, digital technology has hugely contributed to the construction of a city by economizing the cost and enhancing efficiency for city planners and operators so that they can enhance their performance. Digital technology has been used in that sense. But there's one thing very much different from smart city compared to other conventional cities, because we use AI, and artificial intelligence is used for the safety of citizens and for the sake of happiness of citizens. That is the direction and the goal of using digital technology for a smart city. And we record everything in a city and we make it into a data, and that's what we call digital twin. So online, you can have a mimic of a city, actual city, I mean, and through that, we provide services that might be needed by citizens. Even if they don't request a specific service, we can provide that service ahead of their requests. But the important philosophy and value of a smart city is that we understand that a city is not a single structure that is composed of physical structures or facilities, but a city is a combination of intangible services so that we can serve citizens as important actors. Well, they are not a subjective. They are not a passive actor of technology, but we expect that citizens can participate more actively in a process of city construction. So that is what we call smart participation. Well, the main types of participation of citizens in a city operation is filing plaints. filing complaint to the city government. But instead of that, all residents and citizens should be able to figure out the problems and the issues that engender inconveniences to all citizens, and they should find out a technology that could help out with solving those problems. And that's why city participation is always coupled with living lab. Well, the topic that we would like to discuss all today is that, well, it is highly the time for all of us to have a citizen participation in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. We cannot meet each other, and face-to-face gathering is decreasing, and our social activities are diminishing. But even with all these difficulties to gain sustainability, we have to make efforts all together to make a city where we can live and build all together through digital technology. That's what I expect from this discussion.
Thank you, Professor Chung, for your starting comments. Personally, regarding smart cities, I have a very ironical feelings. I have contrasting feelings. These are new technologies, big data, and they provide us tremendous opportunities and possibilities. But at the same time, I'm afraid about all the side effects that it might bring and all the things that we might lose on the way. For example, all the big data. What can we do using the big data for the sake of people's happiness? I know that just this one sentence has underlying difficulties. Imagine all my personal data flying away towards happiness. How can we accept this as a fact? I believe it's very conflicting, but it's unavoidable to have advancement in technologies. So following your comments, I would like to invite Professor Semery regarding technologies. I would like to hear your opinion about innovative industries and the relations with architecture, and especially about your recent smart city program or services. Maybe you can share with us your thoughts and your experiences first, and then we'll go on with our discussion. Professor Semery?
Thank you for your question, and I'm also very glad to be here. So thank you for the invitation to this discussion. My perspective comes from the side of architecture and cities and the life of cities. And the other important thing to mention is that I come from a country which has one city that has 2 million inhabitants. That's where I live now in Budapest. Some cities which have a few 100,000 inhabitants, and almost 3,000 settlements, which are basically villages with a couple of hundred people. So I think we have to, when we talk about smart cities, these scales of settlements from small communities all the way to large world cities, they have very different needs and very different opportunities when it comes to data, collecting data, analyzing data, and providing services upon those data. So for example, in Hungary, but I think also in several countries of this size, which is roughly 10 million people or so, a lot of services and opportunities that we usually associate with cities are better served if they come as central services provided by either a government entity or an institution or a private company who can provide these infrastructures throughout several settlements. So I think this is slightly a different perspective because it often lacks, or it makes it more difficult to connect to one's own environment when you have a service that is detached from your immediate life environment. And I think this is a key point, getting back to the idea of big data and happiness in cities, is that these smart solutions that we usually associate with digital technologies, they should always come as kinds of enhancements of our physical lives in cities and our use of physical spaces. and the encounters that we have with others in cities. So I think the big challenge and the big question, one of the big challenges was the one that you mentioned precisely about the idea of citizen data and what happens with those data so what do we give up for receiving these services? And there, of course, the big idea is, as we know from the medieval ages, that cities were the places of freedom, where you could escape a lot of your social constraints and become somebody new, or you could define your life. And I think it's a crucial question in terms of smart city technologies, of how we can provide the same degree of freedom and the same type of freedom in a digital world with these services and these solutions. I think it's a big challenge. Some cities are stepping up to it. Many private companies are thinking about that. But it's still, nevertheless, I think a key issue going forward. And the second big question is that of participation, of how we can help people have a better connection to their environment and to their communities. And yes, I think the COVID experience has taught us that that we can use these tools for really surprising, very positive outcomes as well. So for us here in particular, during the first wave of the pandemic in early 2020, there was an outpour of community initiatives where several people were getting together to help each other out. Those who were quarantined received services, people were doing help for each other. And I think it was an enormous energy. And it's also interesting to see how that didn't scale up to something bigger, because it wasn't there wasn't an infrastructure in place that could channel this into something bigger and make it sustainable. And I think that's a key question of how, if you have people who have ideas, who would like to improve their cities or participate in the way their cities are being managed, it's a big question of how can you accommodate these and how can you find these initiatives and provide them with resources and infrastructure so that they can scale up and they can become, you could say, a sustainable part of your life, instead of an extra effort that you have to spend, you have to make some compromise to be able to fulfill. So I think these are the key issues, and with the industry question that your question also remarked, I think we can talk about that later. So.
네, 감사합니다. Thank you very much. Your comments, the words like challenge and compromise, 이런 것들이 아마 우리가 지금 처하고 있는
challenge and compromise, and these represent a mixed situation where we are in now, and 2 million inhabitants are being dwelled in Budapest, and it was a pleasure to know the current status of the city where you're living in now. Well, I would like to listen to Ms. Mezonov first. Before we go another round with 3 panelists, what is your opinion about a recent trend of a smart city, or a phenomena of smart city, I would say? Well, currently we have a fad of smart city or smart city making. Where is it headed, you think? This may be a very basic question, but many people are fascinated about the technology and the smart city, but I'm afraid that there may be some things that we miss out unintentionally, not on purpose. So that is why I would like to talk about the direction that we're headed now, please.
Thank you very much for your question. For me too, it's a pleasure to be with you tonight or today. And thank you for the invitation to share on this very important topic. Yes, your question is definitely, I think, the way we have to address currently the topic of smart cities, because it is a question of purpose. And we all know that one of the consequences of the crisis we are currently going through, the COVID crisis, makes many people wonder about what is the purpose of the place we're living, the kind of life they're just having. And we have to ask this question for smart cities too. And this is all the more an important question, because there has been, I would say, there is a kind of negative legacy of the first round, let's say the last 15 years of smart cities. Let me explain a bit. smart cities were not created to improve citizen participation. We must be clear on this. So the concept of smart city was first introduced, and you said it, Professor Jae-sung, to optimize, improve, and not to improve democracy, but to optimize, improve the technical aspects of the city. And then, so you had two models of city. One model was kind of planned tech-oriented cities, and you know it very well in Korea with the example of Sangdo. And the other model was the improving existing cities, and that's what we live more or less in our European cities, as explained by Mr. Shamrai. But in both cases, the what for, the purpose, was left aside. And especially citizens felt that they weren't part of this global discussion on the future of cities. It was technology, cities institutions, but people weren't in the debate. And there was an interesting milestone, and to me this is kind of turning point, which was the experience of Google subsidiary in Toronto in Canada, where Sidewalk Labs, this subsidiary of Google, was awarded the development of urban former industrial area of the city of Toronto, and then brought a lot of very interesting ideas in terms of technology innovation, and at the same time, let's say it, kind of new ways of hearing what the people had to say. So it was very interesting to see how it started, but it ended badly, and the project was abandoned in May 2020. Why? Because precisely, it's not enough when you're talking about the future of the city with a lot of technological innovation. It's not enough to do as we did traditionally, to say, you know, to have some meetings with some people, with some inhabitants, and say, okay, what do you think? What are your ideas? It's not enough. You have to bring another, I would say, ingredient in the recipe of smart city, which is the building of trust. And building of trust, which is a very condition of why we accept to live in a city where there is density, where there is a lot of uncertainty, unknown. I would say it's the other element. You talked about freedom, Mr. Shamra, and I totally agree with you. And freedom and trust are the two faces of a medal. And precisely what we saw in Toronto with the Google project was there was no successful way for building this trust between technology, cities, institutions, and people. There was one foot missing, and then the project totally collapsed. And for me, this turning point is interesting because it was already reflected 2 years before 2020 in San Francisco, when the city, so we are there in the, I would say, the place where everything started in terms of digital revolution, San Francisco, the Silicon Valley. And the city in 2018 said, okay, for you tech operator, tech companies, now when you come to San Francisco, you will have to demonstrate that your innovation brings something positive for the communities. And they established an Office of Emerging Technology, which was in charge of assessing if such or such innovation made sense for the people of San Francisco. And this is interesting because they said, well, our city, our citizens are not the guinea pigs of innovation, you know, the city are labs, but people are not laboratory rats. It's what they say more or less. And this turning point, the Google episode, the San Francisco episode, for me opened a new era in the smart cities, which was accelerated by the COVID crisis, exactly as what was previously said. And what's interesting today is how and if smart cities will be able to capture this moment of the what for moment, what is the purpose? And we start and see some very interesting initiative, and I will end like this to have this further debate after. For example, the emergence of this concept of climate smart cities, which is interesting because it gives a purpose for smart cities, which is the climate change mitigation or adaptation. And this exactly meets people's concerns when it comes to the future of their life. And today, as I started saying, we are very, very concerned about the future of our life. So I think we are living a very important moment, a turning point where maybe, I guess this is the major age of smart cities, we are reaching the true questions, and we are arriving to a point where all the people who have to be around the table when we talk about smart cities are now there. Technology, companies, providers, and so on, institutions, and citizens. So let's see what we can do with that. Thank you.
네, 선생님 감사합니다. 오늘
Thank you very much, Ms. Mesnov. Well, all of you have put on the table keywords and key terms of this discussion in relation with smart city. Yes, right. We're on the verge of turning point with building together and participation. And on the basis, we have freedom and the site work lab of Toronto and the San Francisco implications are two good examples. So I would like to turn to Professor Tong.
What do you think is about from your experience from Sejong City? How can you share with us? What can you share with us? For what purpose was Sejong City built as a smart city, and how is citizen participation overflowing, which is completely different from foreign countries' experience? I'll ask you first, and then after I'll ask the other participants. As Ms. Maisonneuve or Mr. Smery said, I agree to what they said. Especially in our country, smart cities was built as planned in the beginning, and I believe that citizens participated a lot and they're contributing a lot. But unfortunately, that experience was not repeated in many other cities also. So this is an ongoing process. And you also mentioned about the fact that you have conflicting feelings, sentiments regarding smart cities. And I believe that this is actually quite normal and that we should have those conflicting feelings because technologies should be used for people and that not against people. For example, CCTVs, cameras, in Korea, during the ubiquitous city era before 20 years ago, a lot of citizens and a lot of communities were against it because it was like Big Brother was watching and doing surveillance over our citizens. 20 years after, now, thinking about the power that cameras have to contend against crimes, this is quite useful, and we do not talk about it anymore. So I believe that in the future also, when we're building smart cities, when we gather and collect data, those data should not be used for crime. And that is why we need to reinforce institutions and laws regarding it. And this is the direction in which we're going. And in that context, I believe that the trust citizens are giving us is very important. And the reason why in Toronto it did not work is because the privacy issue regarding their data was not resolved peacefully. Therefore, I believe that it is a key factor for the success of smart cities to know how to gain the trust of citizens. Smart cities in themselves are not the goal. Smart cities is a means through which citizens want to achieve something. Then we need to think about what Sejong Smart City is made for. and we need to have a public discussion about this. It cannot be an end by itself. We're not seeking to build a technopia. For example, you talked about a city that is centered on climate, for example. Many cities in Europe are centered on one theme, on resilience, on mobility. Many small cities have themes. But Sejong Smart City is not that a case. We do not have one direction. We have 7 different directions. And the reason behind this is because I saw a city as a complex city. Whatever city, a small or a big one, is very complex. It is supposed to embrace the different people living in it. Even a person that lives in a city centered on energy needs mobility, education, healthcare, governance, and everything. His life cannot be based only on energy. So the difference, I believe, between Sejong Smart City and other small European cities based on one theme is that Sejong City is very small but has mobility, energy, education, healthcare, governance, shopping and culture, and also job creation, has all the elements that we need to create a small city, even though it's not a huge megapolis like Korea. And I believe that Sejong City is capable of satisfying the needs of Sejong citizens, and that is why people do not feel the need to leave Sejong for another city and can be happy living in Sejong. And that is probably the one difference different from European countries. I would like to add one more comment. When you were talking about smart cities, you mentioned that people living in cities are not rats in labs. Of course, it's true. Citizens shouldn't be the subject of tests. But when we were creating smart cities, I heard that comment a lot of times. But I thought to myself, we are trying to build a space for citizens, but how can we do it without testing? It's not building without any data, but we need to create a test bed and do different types of tests within this space. Of course, with active citizens that are willing to give us their data so that we can analyze it, and with their willingness to participate in this project, of course, being very transparent with the use of data. And that is why Sejong City was what we call an example on a national pilot program from the Korean government. And within Sejong City, we did not have enough maturity in terms of technology. And that is why we tried to recruit many active participants that were eager to help us develop this smart city. Of course, many other European cities in which it is impossible to regenerate anymore, but we did not have, of course, compared to those European cities, we did not have enough budget maybe, and also many European countries might not have enough budget also to allocate to many different themes, and that is why they're centered on one theme. But in Korea, we had a national level test bed, and that is why after Sejong City, it was possible to expand this experience to other new smart cities, and in that way it is very meaningful. Yes, thank you very much.
Well, speaking of that, Mr. Samari and Ms. Mazunov, would you like to make some comments on to Professor Chang's? Well, actually, I agree with these remarks. Well, why am I feeling uncomfortable? I am curious to know. So, Shamari, Mr. Shamari?
I think that let's take test beds, for example. I think that's an important issue when it comes to development. And of course, it's very easy to change the software if you have a laptop and there's a software you don't like. You usually have a choice to swap it, and it doesn't really make a big change in your life. It's much more difficult to change your city or your neighborhood if it doesn't work and you have to move. So it's much more of an emotional and every other kind of effort to change that. So you have to be very wary about risks when you take these kind of tests. But I think it's more important to be clear about what risks are taken and by whom exactly. So usually it's if you have such a living lab environment, then much of the risk is usually taken by the decision maker who actually finances that laboratory. So whether that's a national project or a local government or a private company, they are the ones who run this test, and if it doesn't work, then they have to kind of bear the consequences. But I think people are usually open and intelligent enough to understand that what they're trying there is really a trial thing, and it's not going to change their environment forever, and it's not going to necessarily work. And if it doesn't work, then we can always just fall back on what we had previously. So I think it's important, and it's also a kind of it can also be a fun way to get familiar with these developments in our cities. I think it's a relatively recent phenomenon and quite independent from smart technologies that people are becoming, or communities are becoming much more involved in the everyday operation and also the development of their immediate environment. This was not always like that, but there's, I think, a general interest, which is probably a shift. It comes with a shift of culture and social attitudes and many other things as well. And of course, the technologies can accommodate that very easily. And I think one way that might answer your concern is the contrast between citizens and users. A lot of the technologies that we subscribe to and use, especially social media and stuff that has been invading our lives in the last 20 years, have user agreements, and you sign or you agree and tick a box, and then you start using that. But that puts you in a radically different position than being a citizen of a country or the inhabitant of a city. That provides different expectations and different rights, and I think these are usually mixed up, and it's difficult to. Of course, people are rarely conscious about that, but it can have very grave consequences. If you are used to the idea of let's say a public space which is being run by a private entity all of a sudden, and they're the ones who define the rules, you might run into not very pleasant surprises about how your city operates. And these are the things that have to be very clear, and probably these are some of the things that led to the demise of the Toronto project and some others as well. And also these are the things that some cities, especially the cities that I know about, like Barcelona or Amsterdam, have been focusing on in recent years, of how they can provide these kind of environments that both encourage innovation and companies and several different entities to come together and come up with new ideas and new methods and technologies, but also to safeguard their citizens and their public institutions also from becoming subjects of these kind of business-oriented developments. So I think these are the, sort of the key points which I agree going forward. There might have been a sort of a crucial moment of change now that these things will be or will have to be much clearer in the coming years.
네, 감사합니다. 메조네브 선생님 코멘트 하나 question.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mazunov. Please.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting debate. Yeah, to come back on the test bed theme, because as you both said, it's a very important point. I totally agree with you, Professor Jae-Sung Jung, that we absolutely need to have some quantification and use of data. There is absolutely no question of that, because it helps better understanding our cities. But what is interesting in the smart city and what becomes more interesting in the smart city, it's when there is a two-way flows of data. What I mean through this is that I think that tech operators, city services operators have also a lot to learn from the citizen practices. It's a two-way flows of information. And it's exactly for me, the meaning of smart refers to two different things. On the one hand, you have what the old Greek called noesis, which is the intellectual smartness, rationality, what we do with the part of our brain, and you know better than me about this, which are very rational. But there is not only in the term smart, there is another aspect, which is what the old Greek called metis. Metis is the way to being, you know, to make your way through things in a way that nobody would have imagined. It's the metis is when Ulysses enables the Greek army to enter the city of Troy because of the horse. So it's really a kind of cunning way of doing things. And when you look at citizen in the city, and I refer in this example to what the MIT lab of Carlo Ratti, Sensible City Lab, published. It was years ago in 2008, but when he showed maps of Rome and how people were really moving in the city of Rome. If you take the noesis side, the smart side, rational, you take a map of mobility infrastructure in Rome and you think that people are moving from point A to point B, the way the engineers who designed the infrastructure network thought they would behave. But in fact, they wouldn't move according to this kind of pre-scheduled mapping. They would do differently. They would make their own way because of their way of life. And there you could see that they were using the city, this experiential city is for me very interesting also to bring in, I agree with you, in the quantity of information and data that city planners and city operators and city responsible have to use. But this is what gets interesting there, is that with some tools such as digital twins, we can integrate those kind of data. The point being, and we come back to your very important point, Mr. Shamray, about the difference between citizens and users. There is no CGU of the city. There can't be, there won't be, and we don't want this. It's not for this purpose that we come and live in cities. And from that point of view, I guess that when you look at once again, because there's so much to learn about the Google example, they try to rewrite the rules of privacy in Toronto, in a country where the privacy rules are very clear. They are not at all like American rules. They are more European inspired. They rewrite the concept of personal data. They rewrite the concept. They invented the concept of data trust, urban data. What is this? So I guess the question of the clarity of the rules, and behind this, the clarity of the political vision, which is borne by the city leaders, is very important, because you can't have any effective citizen participation without the political vision. Political are here to have the vision and to decide. It's not, I would say, it's not citizen in other framework to decide. We have some representative system and it's working like this and it's efficient. But the question is how you integrate citizen views in your decision. And this two-way informational city based on the experience of city by citizens, on the collective intelligence of citizens, is where we have to head to answer your question, Mrs. Moderator.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. We discussed a lot, very in depth, about smart cities, and I'm very grateful to all our panelists. I would like to add one more comment, and I would like to go one layer deeper. It's a question we had in the first roundtable. When we talk about communities or citizens, we do not talk about one entity, because even citizens are composed of many different entities and people. So smart cities, of course, we use digital technologies. Smart cities are based on digital technologies, but there might be some groups that are not very familiar with digital technologies. So how can we accept this dynamic between groups that are familiar and groups that are not familiar? Because citizen participation, when it comes to smart cities, I believe that the divide and the gap between people that are used to technologies and are not is even greater. So can we improve this gap paradoxically through these technologies? Or how can we help those groups that are not familiar with technologies? What kind of effort can we make to reduce the gap? I would like to ask you Ms. Professor Chung first, and then all our panelists.
Professor Chung, please. Digital literacy matters. I totally agree with your idea. And technology is in transition period, so there are always a big divide between those who know and those who do not know. But once technology is mature, then the easiness to use goes up. And that's the innate characteristics of a technology. For instance, 10 years ago, when a smartphone comes up to the stage, there was a very big gap between smartphone user and non-user. But 10 years after that, there's no one in the world who do not know how to use a smartphone. There's a very small number. Even a 3-year-old baby can use a smartphone. That's that easy. Well, city is not an exception to this. Well, people living in a smart city do not need to know about technology because technology is invisible. It's just a deep layer which reduces the burden. But that a smart city doesn't mean that people have to know about technology. If it forces that, then that's not a smart city. Well, if a resident should be smart, that's not a smart city. You can park your bicycle anywhere. If the technology can only be used with difficulties to be a user of delivery service, for example, that can't be called as a smart city. That's why we put more focus on blockchain technology. As you have just mentioned, if there's an ample data, how to use that data should be transparently managed and shared with everybody. If not, a specific company and city will play a role of Big Brother. So to be cautious about that, to be a watchdog, we need to spread the technology as much as possible and as large as possible. And that is also recognized by engineers who the blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is something that enables us to share all information in a one big chat room. So that reduces the mail use of information. And that's the difference. When we go further to a better technology, that becomes more transparent and easier to be shared with everybody, and no need to understand it in a complicated way. And as such, we need to establish an infrastructure of a smart city to make it a success. So personally, I would like to highlight that a technology is invisible. It's not about technopia. Well, let me take an example of Sejong City. There's a a special space, a particular space where two rivers intermingle together. And once this city is selected as a pilot smart city, that swamp area is open now to everybody. We didn't try to block the area, but we have made a metaverse environment as a digital twin of that swamp so that we can enhance the educational content, but we try to teach citizens to protect the ecosystem of the swamp. So the more we have parks in a city, those parks should be managed well so that there can't be a squat. But without smart city technology inside, women cannot pass through that park at the night time. So more humane city, more friendly city can only be established with invisible technology backed up. And that's a smart city that I'm visioning. Well, listening to your story, it makes me think that technological problems can be only solved by technology. What do you think, Mr. Chamaret and Ms. Mazunov? Please, I would like to listen to your comments.
Well, I think we can understand cities themselves as technologies, and we have had cities for several thousand years, and smart technologies for, let's say, less than 50 years, depending on what you call a smart technology. You could call a Roman aqueduct a smart technology as well for its time. But of course, when we talk about digital data-driven technologies, it's very recent. So I think we have to be humble when we think about how we use technologies in cities. And there are a lot of old smart technologies, which I think perfectly serve the purpose of urban life. And when we think of how we interact with these technologies, there's always an interface. The door handle that you use to open your door is an interface of a technology that we've been using for several hundred years. And I think with time, today's data-driven technologies might become similarly familiar and old-fashioned things. But the other thing, I think it's important what Mr. Jong was mentioning, that technology doesn't have to be visible. A lot of the technology, or it doesn't have to be in the front. Let's put it this way. So there were, 10 years ago or so, or 15 years ago, there were a lot of discussions about silent technologies or ubiquitous technologies. And a lot of this was going towards the idea that you might have a system that is digitally driven, but the way you interact with it doesn't have to be digital. So it doesn't have to be a screen. It doesn't have to be what you would normally use, like a keyboard or something like that, to make a decision in your urban life. And it's usually even very much out of context and sort of unnatural feeling. And I personally really don't like screens in urban space, because they draw your attention from your environment, and it provides a very different way of interacting with the city. So I think even though we have let's say we have a high-tech system for delivering mail, you still might interact with the postman or whoever comes by to deliver the stuff that you ordered. And similarly, there's a lot of ways we can imagine interfaces for technologies which help those who either don't have the smart technologies themselves, or who are not skilled in using them because of their age, because of their education, or whatever other reasons that they are not, they're not there at the sort of edge of these technologies. And I think this is what we have to design for. And there's one more thing I would like to add, and that's the role of institutions. I think one of the best examples that I know about large-scale rollouts of smart technologies is Estonia, which is a tiny country. But they were, I think, to me, I've seen the best example there for rolling out a completely digital government service package to the entire country, which obviously has a lot of citizens who are old, illiterate, or they have some limitations in using technology. And the way this was resolved in Estonia was that libraries were designated as these institutions, basically interfaces with technology. So libraries are one of the, we have, again, libraries we've had for several thousand years. And what have they been doing throughout these several thousand years? They've been managing our data. They are archives, and they're managing and structuring data. And so they're perfect for this function of actually providing this kind of interaction And maybe if you prepare librarians, they, instead of looking for books, they might help you with, doing your tax returns or your health services or whatever you need to do. So I think we can look at several institutions and often cultural and educational institutions as these kinds of environments where most people are familiar, even those who are not technologically savvy, and we can provide help for them to use this, even, and not necessarily in a way of educating them and then letting them go, but there is this kind of permanent interface of an institution. Institutions are a long-term thing, and I think it's very good to think of them as this kind of backbones of our urban lives, besides the, let's say, the physical interactions that we have with our cities.
네, 감사합니다.
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned ways of improving the digital divide through technologies, or also you also talked about the fact that we can use traditional interfaces in order to reduce those technological gaps. It's very soothing. Ms. Maisonneuve, maybe you can add some comments, please.
Well, I would go a bit in the same direction because I like very much the idea of invisibility of technology because, well, our cities are about complexity, and it's a bit, I would compare it with the body, all the theories about urban metabolism. Our bodies are wonderful, complex machineries, and we don't necessarily need to know it well to live well. Well, our cities, it's a bit the same. They are very complex entities, but what makes a city attractive and pleasant to live in is a city where we find life simple, where it's simple to move around, where it's simple to meet with people, simple to have water, electricity. So it's about, our experience is about simplicity. And there, I come from a country where the character of the engineer is very strong. And from that point of view, I guess it's always very interesting to learn from the other side, the designers who are user-centric, people-centric. And this wedding between huge innovation from engineers and the design like-minded is very interesting, because it's this which enables a smoother interface. And I would just like to add an example. I guess we have also to really break this idea that technology innovation is elitist. I would like to a bit attack the idea of the creative class. There is a creative class. The cities, modern metropolises are for them. There are the others. No, I think that there is a kind of intelligence of people that you have to address. And from that point of view, I was very much interested in what I saw a few years ago in the city of Boston. That the very city center of Boston is a very deprived area. It was the historical heart of the city, the Roxbury area. And what they did to break this idea in this kind of mecca of innovations, Boston, MIT, Harvard, and so on, what they did, they create a Roxbury Innovation Center in a place, it's a bit what you said, Mr. Shamrai, with the libraries, in a place which was dedicated to poor communities in the area of Roxbury. And the Innovation Center was located there. I think there is a kind of speciality of innovation. You have to embody it on the ground, very, I would say, very in buildings, in places, to have to send this message that smart is not for the happy few, the others staying in the old world. And from that point of view, I guess that if there is one positive aspect from this COVID crisis, is that we have been very, very much accelerating this learning curve. And think about just one example. If ever there is a generational gap when it comes to modern technologies, which I'm not sure about, what we did through, for example, remote medicine consultation was really interesting. And from that point of view, we have clearly seen that these kind of technologies were for everybody, and for everybody to make their life simpler, and in this example, healthier. So it's this. I think we shouldn't underestimate the accelerating curve we are on because of the pandemic. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 시간이 이제 approaching ending point로 가고
Thank you very much. We are now approaching the end of our discussion, so I would like to ask for your ending comment before we end this discussion. And I maybe add up one question we received from YouTube channel. Well, actually, there's a question on YouTube saying that goes like this. Well, smart city highlights the importance of data. It's inevitable. Then, when there's an issue of privacy, for example, in collecting data, and who owns the data, who manages the data, and who privatize the data collected from everywhere, what kind of safety net can we provide? And how do you see this as architect, as a person interested in city? So I would like to ask for your ending comment in that sense. Oh, we have another question. Well, Ms. Hin has asked this question. I am not clear about the concept of a smart city, but I know that there are kiosks everywhere, which is really difficult to use. And I know that there are citizens that might be neglected from these smart technologies, such as kiosk, and I myself even sometimes feel that I am neglected and I'm not included. So would you like to make a comment onto that too? So this will be your ending comment. So Professor Jung, would you like to go first?
So I'm a scientist, and at the same time, I am emphasizing the possibilities of smart cities. So it looks like I'm quite optimistic about technologies. But when we go back to basis, science is all about politics. It is not at all neutral, because we follow what power tells us to follow. So that is why citizen participation is extremely important. We need to guide the government to use those technologies for the citizens. We need citizens to participate actively, to criticize it. And that is why we need to avoid the situation where one big company privatizes and owns those data. So, and with the money we get from data, we can actually give it back to the citizens like a basic income. And I believe that that small entities such as IT businesses should not take account for this. But when we talk about GPS, for instance, you might think that you don't want to give your data to your car, but through satellites, we know already the predictions that and the time that it takes us to go from one point to another. So the GPS helps us to go from one place to another with no fear, and that help us to go through these travels with no fear. And it also helped us to discover other cities, and it helped us to discover other parts of the city. So I believe that this is one aspect of the possibilities that a smart city can offer. And that is why people that create smart cities and manage smart cities should encourage people to participate more, and we should not go through a technopia. But I believe that this night of ideas will help us to make more ideas.
And Mr. Shimura, please.
Thank you. And I think both questions are really prescient in highlighting the key issues we talked about. So data, and we could call the kiosk question the question of interfaces, of how how can we develop connections with smart technologies that actually are open for everyone. I like to think of the smart city as a method of approaching urban development and running cities rather than a goal that we should reach or sort of a stage of development, because again, as I stressed earlier, I think several cities several hundred years ago were also smart for their age. So I think it's more of an approach to how we run our cities and how we develop them. And in that regard, it's also technology agnostic. And I think, of course, today the big question is about data. And the question about data ownership, I think, is a key one. I was part of a team that built data repository for Hungarian cities that is provided centrally. And our vision, I think, which is also the vision of several other projects like this, was that with building a data infrastructure for local data is not so much like building a safe that is like a bank vault that you protect from everyone or anyone who shouldn't get access to it, but rather to provide a basic infrastructure for people to use that data as much as they can. I think it's good to think of such urban data, whatever that actually means, as a platform on which you can base education, a platform that you can develop games or sort of play for your kids. And, you know, any kid who learns about the world through their own city and learns in school that they have the opportunity to experiment and learn about the world using their own home world will much less likely move away to a large city and then, contribute to a lot of urban problems today where we have people concentrating in a few very large cities and leaving the countryside. If we can provide data for today's development everywhere locally, I think that helps to develop this kind of knowledge and awareness and infrastructure. So I like to think of urban data this way rather than something which only needs to be protected. Of course, protection and safety is a key question there, but it's also the infrastructure of our future knowledge and abilities and our future connection to our neighborhoods and our physical environment. So I think that's a key point. And it doesn't have to be digital only. So the kiosks are always problematic because, again, they get outdated very quickly. So by the time you finish installing these, usually, they're also already something to be changed. So the more we can accommodate to this kind of long durée perspective on urban life, which is much more about centuries than about months, then we can develop technologies which can last a long time and be familiar for several generations to come.
네, 감사합니다. 마지막으로 매정 선생님.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mazunov. Would you like to make your ending remark, please?
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly, 2 points about data. First of all, de facto or unsolicited private monopolies over cities are a danger and a risk for the future of cities. So this is an antitrust thematic. This is totally opposed to the DNA of cities, which are about diversity. And so there we have an issue with the big transnational tech companies, and cities are dealing with this as well as states, I would say. So first point. Second point about privacy and ownership. I guess the problem is not so much ownership. The vulnerability of data is when it's shared. What makes data vulnerable, it's a bit like when you're at home, you're protected. When you cross the street, danger appears. It's a bit like this with data. When it changes, when it goes from one place to another, there you have a huge vulnerability. Hence, the question about data and privacy is very much about how do you share data? Because all what we said about services and the improving life of people is about data sharing. So this is a key point, and this is what we have to work on to reduce this vulnerability. And I would conclude by saying, and this stems also from this point, that smart city, as you said, Mr. Shamray, it's not an object, it's a process. It's a dynamic process which has constantly to be monitored, optimized, and questioned. So you need really to have dynamic regulations, and I would say open eyes on what's going on, and not think that smartity is like a marble you can't move anymore. You can't remove anymore when it's in the city. And there it's a good way of understanding and integrating social concerns about smart city if you see smart cities as a really ongoing and learning processes for everybody, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for participating in this very intense, in-depth debate. And I think that the night of ideas, the goal of the night of ideas was very clear to us all. Personally, I do not think that it is about making one conclusion, but rather taking away many questions to think about. Thank you once again for all the participants. I'm sorry we didn't finish on time, but I was extremely grateful so that we could have this debate. I don't know what kind of questions we will have next year, but expecting the next year. Thank you very much.